Good morning. It is 11 o'clock and time for our October TTAC meeting to begin. I want to go ahead and call this meeting to order. I will start with our welcome script, but then I would like us to go through a roll call if I get staff after I do the whole public comment thing out of the way to do a quick roll call for us. So welcome to TTAC. We are meeting remotely, and so we'll be doing public comment via the remote system. I'll call for public comment on every agenda item, and when we are on that public comment, we will have the phone lines you can call in on posted to your screen where you're viewing this, and then we'll wait for you. We'll give you some time to call that number, and when you do call in, you'll be placed in a waiting room, and I'll call your ID when it is we're ready to take your comment. When you call, please mute your TV or computer so we don't have an echo. Tell us your name and your comment. Please be aware there's a delay of about 50 seconds from what you're hearing at home and the actual meeting. So it's okay to start speaking right away when you hear us, when I hear you calling me. But we will be observing a speaking limit of 3 minutes so we can hear everyone. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. We are officially called to order. And can I have a roll call of members to determine who's present?
TTAC. Absent. Sarah Cofield.
I'm here.
Corey Aldridge. Absent.
Vince Caristo, proxy for Corey today.
Okay. Dory Brownlow. Absent. Ellen Bachman. Don Barrow. Absent. Jacqueline Smith.
Present.
Present. Chet Krauser. Absent. Juniper Davis.
Present.
Present. Donna Cockler, sorry.
Neil Miner, proxy for Donna Gockler.
Ryan Hammond. Absent. Len Helgard.
Present.
Jeremy Keane.
Present.
Ben Weiss. Absent. Tiffany Brander.
Present.
Brian Hillstad. Absent.
Present. Actually present.
Sorry. Bynum Jackson.
Present.
Eva Rocky. Absent. Kathy Potts.
This is Vicki Cernich, proxy for Katie Potts.
Thank you.
I think that's everyone, Sarah.
I do believe we've had a few people pop on who missed the roll call. So if you are here and you missed roll call, please state your name for us, please.
Ben Weiss, City of Missoula.
Dory Brownlow with Missoula County.
Rob Gannon, City of Missoula, Chief Financial Officer, sitting in with multiple points of interest.
All right, thank you so much. And I do believe we had somebody was proxy for Corey Aldridge. I'm not entirely sure that that got caught in the kind of overspeak. Who's proxy for Corey?
This is Vince Caristo, proxy for Corey Aldridge today.
Awesome, thank you so much, Vince.
Oh.
Muted. We have a roll call complete for our members. Who do we have with us from the public?
I don't know, public, this is Aaron Wilson with the Missoula MPO.
And good morning, Sarah and TTAC. This is Jennifer Wieland with Nelson Nygaard.
And John Sand with the MPO.
Zachary Zabel with Nelson Nygaard is also here.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's go ahead and get into our agenda. Our first item is the approval of minutes. Can I get a motion for the minutes?
This is Dory Brown, the wall. Dory Brown, the wall, move to approve the minutes.
Thank you so much. Any discussion or a second?
This is Neil, I'll second.
Great. All right. To make things hopefully a bit faster, anyone opposed to adopting the minutes? All right, seeing none, motion carries. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and we're going to move on now to our public comment period. So here we are on our public comment. If you'd like to submit public comment, we're going to open the phone lines and we'll take the comment as they come in. Our admin has put the call-in numbers on the screen. I'll go ahead and read some if anybody has any vision difficulties. 1-267-831-0333 or 1-888-475-4499. The meeting ID is 960-049-3694. We'll answer calls in order received. I'll call on you by your phone number. Please be sure to mute your TV or computer, tell us your name and what is on your mind. We'll be observing the speaking limit of 3 minutes so we can hear from everyone. We'll go ahead and give that a few minutes and then we'll move on. Well, all right. I don't believe we've had anybody call in, so we'll go ahead and move on to our only agenda item, which is another update on our long-range transportation plan, working at scenario development and metrics. So Aaron and Jennifer, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I'll just get us started while Jennifer's getting her. Jennifer, you were going to share the presentation.
Yep, I will. Go right ahead and introduce us.
Yeah, so once again, we're back with some updates. I guess it's been a little while since we presented to TTAC, just partially due to the scheduling challenges that we've had over the last month or two, just with COVID and with technology challenges and competing interests for meeting space and use of that technology at the city. But I think we've had a good couple of months of progress. And so we're at the point now where we're really moving into the next stage of the long range plan update and getting into our scenarios and evaluation and preparing for the next round of public engagement. So we have a fair amount of information to present today, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion about that. And then we'll talk about some next steps. And but I do just want to reiterate that there will be a lot of information today, and we are not done with all of this, and realize that we got some of it out later than we had maybe anticipated. Or there hasn't been a ton of time unless all the rest of you are working on the weekends as well. So there will be some more time over the next week or two to get comments back. And this is just sort of a start of that conversation as we develop these scenarios over the next couple of weeks. So I think with that, I'll hand it over to Jennifer to get us started.
Great, thanks, Aaron. And I just flipped us to some of the recent work that's been underway, and Aaron touched on a lot of this. As Aaron mentioned, we haven't been in front of the full TTAC for a little bit of time, but really appreciate all of you joining us for one-on-one conversations, for the meeting with our technical advisory committee last month, because there has been a tremendous amount of work underway as we have moved through sorting the projects that came in through all of our public outreach over the summer, and then continuing to advance our thinking about land use and growth scenarios, as well as the transportation network scenarios. So I would certainly invite you all to jump in with questions or comments as we go. We will pause several times and have some discussion with the group, because as Aaron mentioned, there is a lot of content that we're going to try and move through pretty quickly. So just to start us off, I'm going to take us back just a few weeks and reorient everyone to where we've landed in terms of our list of transportation capital projects. We'll talk a little bit about how this list was developed and sort of where it fits into the bigger picture as we get started. So just as a reminder, in case you have forgotten, this is our 5-step evaluation framework process for the long-range transportation plan. And we have completed the first 3 steps in terms of collecting projects and programs, screening those, and scoring them. And now we are very much in the midst of our 4th step, which is developing and ranking scenarios. This step is really going to carry us through almost the end of the year in terms of both our development of the scenarios and then also public outreach. And then as we head into early 2021, we'll be prioritizing the recommended projects for the long range plan and coming back to TTAC and TPCC with a draft plan early in 2021. So just a quick refresher of those different steps in the process. So first and foremost, we collected projects and programs, and we did this in a lot of different ways. We had an interactive map that the public could chime in on with projects and programs. We also had a Google form. We worked directly with our committees and with many of you in small group sessions to identify other projects. And we pulled all the projects from the 2016 plan that hadn't been completed yet. So all in all, that gave us over 200 different project ideas. So our next step was then screening those projects and programs. And our intent in doing this screening is really to ensure that the projects and programs that we're moving forward are appropriate for the long range plan. Sometimes there are project ideas that either came from committee members, that came from members of the public, that don't quite rise to the level of a regional long-range plan. They're much better addressed through an ongoing maintenance program that the city or county might have, or they're more programmatic in nature. So for example, thinking about a transportation demand management program that builds on Missoula in Motion, expands on that policy work. Those are examples of some of the types of projects and programs that might not rise to this first level that we were focused on. It's not to say that they can't be included in the long range plan. Certainly for the program side, they will be. But we did really try and sort through and ensure that the projects we're moving forward weren't duplicative of projects of one another, so that we resolved some of those conflicts. We also took a close look at them for suitability and feasibility. So there definitely have been projects on the books for a while that either are no longer needed or just for practical purposes aren't feasible to move forward. So we did a little bit of resolution of those as well. And then we did some consolidation and separation of projects. You all probably remember that in the 2016 long range plan, all of the Greenway projects were grouped as a single project to deliver, and those have now been split out in keeping with the work that has been done at the city level and also thinking at the county. So then the next thing we did was score all of those projects. And those of you who participated in our technical advisory committee in August got to take a look at the initial project scoring. We've continued to refine that scoring. We've also identified some missing projects and added them to the list. We've continued conversations both on the technical side and then also with members of the public to help fill things out a little bit more. And we revised some of our project descriptions and adjusted the extent so that our GIS-based scoring tool for the projects would really capture the full nuance of what we were seeing and the potential benefits that the projects could deliver. The other thing that we did over the last few weeks is test 5 different approaches to weighting the projects based on the goals that TTAC and TPCC have approved for the project. We ultimately landed on a weighting approach that really focuses in on equity, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But this was really a significant effort over the last few weeks to ensure that we had all of the right projects and that the scores were making sense. So we aren't going to spend a lot of time today going through all of the projects in great detail. There are 173 that are still currently on the list that's in your packet. But the information we have provided in your packet for your review includes the updated project descriptions. We've provided information about project level costs, so pretty high level costs at this point, as well as total scores and some weighted scores, so that we're really transparent in terms of what this initial phase of project scoring has shown us. So before I jump into the scenarios, which is going to be our biggest point of discussion today, does anyone have comments or questions about the project list or those first 3 steps in the process? Okay, hearing none immediately, we will jump into scenarios. I certainly would invite you all, as you have a few minutes through the rest of this week, to take a close look at the project list. We have done our best to incorporate all of the feedback that has come in. It is certainly possible that we have missed a project and that there's something else that needs to be included. And so would definitely welcome any of that feedback from TTAC members over the course of this week. So let's talk about how we're using all of those projects to shape scenarios, because this is really where we start to move into another phase of analysis and begin to think about the ways that we combine different projects with different growth projections and understand how those combinations are going to move us toward our goals. So just as a quick reminder, why do we do scenario planning in a long range process? It is very much about trying to understand how different combinations of projects, programs, and investments can achieve different benefits. All of the projects that we are moving forward in the scenario planning phase are good projects. They all advance the goals that have been set for Missoula Connects and for the region. But we wanted to see how we can maximize those goals in different ways and really use the scenario planning process to communicate both benefits and trade-offs. And so that is why, as we move into the discussion of the scenarios, you will see that we do have different projects included in the 3 different scenarios to try and not only set some bookends, but really to illustrate how different projects perform together and how we can maximize different types of benefits. So the first piece of the scenario planning process that we wanted to bring back to you, and we've had a little conversation about this, is that we are using 2 growth scenarios for this long range plan. And Erin's going to talk a little bit more about these and the process that we went through to develop these.
Yeah, thanks. So big picture, one of the reasons, and we've talked about this at past meetings, that we want to look at growth scenarios as part of this evaluation process in the plan, in part because we want to create a better or communicate a better connection between land use and growth, and that's the impact that has on our transportation system, and understanding that it may have as much or more of an impact than the limited investments that we know we can make over the next 30 years. And so we wanted a way to help show that and help communicate that and have that be part of our decision making in this plan. So as Jennifer mentioned, we came up with 2 growth scenarios. There's a couple of common pieces to each one of those. One is that we kept growth consistent between both scenarios. So they both use the same growth rate, the same total number of households and population in that 2050, over that 30-year period out to 2050. We also based that growth rate on sort of historic trends and what's been used in the growth policies and sort of the best available information that we have. And that's right around 1.5%. And that may be a little high or a little low, depending on what happens and how it feels like we're in a period of rapid change. Whether that means we're going to see more growth or less, it's hard to know. But at the end of the day, it's using a consistent number. It's compared consistently across both of those scenarios. And if we grow faster, it just means we hit that point a little bit quicker. And if we grow slower, it'll take us a little bit longer. So at the end of the day, we're eventually going to hit those targets. So trying to keep it consistent. And so we developed two scenarios based on that. One is what we're calling kind of a business as usual, that growth is going to occur where there's capacity, where there's zoning and land use, and available opportunity to accommodate that growth. It doesn't mean that it's, really dispersed. It's still taking into account some of our planning that's happened in the past. It's still thinking about the focus inward approach from the growth policies. But it's more of a dispersed in the sense that there's not a lot of thinking about the timing of when and where growth should occur. So sequencing where growth will happen, or building out some areas quicker than others, which is what led us into the strategic growth, which is really looking at targeting more growth where there's capacity in areas that are already developed, or where there's sort of increasing the rate of that focus inward. And so focusing more of the growth in the core. So you can see during the business as usual, these maps are showing where that growth is projected to happen. And these are sort of large numbers, but most of the growth is still happening in the core under both scenarios. But, there's showing a lot of growth in the Y, some additional growth in target range areas west of the Mullen master plan area. And then what these maps aren't showing is all the growth that's happening outside the urban area. So in unincorporated Missoula County, or places like Lolo or Frenchtown, or beyond. So business as usual allocates that growth sort of according to previous growth patterns. Strategic growth, we really wanted to focus on a couple of core areas. Some that we've been planning for. So a good example is the Mullen Area Master Plan. And really trying to look at what happens if we actually maximize the growth that's projected in that planning. So adding an additional about 3,000 units to that Mullen area that's around the build grant and part of that master plan. We also looked at areas in the core that could accommodate had a lot of capacity for growth that we've also been talking about. So a good example of that is the Brooks corridor, and there's a lot of opportunity for redevelopment. We've talked a lot about that corridor's opportunities to accommodate a lot of our future growth. So again, this is more of not just putting a lot of density in wherever in the core, but really thinking about where there's opportunities and how we could accommodate more growth and what might make sense. And so that led us to sort of overall change between the two scenarios. And you can see a lot of the change is happening in that Mullen Area Master Plan, the Brooks corridor, and that additional growth is being pulled from areas like the Y, or some of the further out communities, places further out west on Mullen Road, Target Range, Miller Creek, just to illustrate, and thinking about these growth policies as a way to evaluate what happens if we do concentrate a lot more growth in the urban core where we have existing services and employment and existing transportation facilities. So that's kind of big picture overview of how we developed that. And we worked with some of the land use planners. We worked with Laval and Andrew and Karen to get some of those ideas on where is the most logical place that we could concentrate that growth.
Thanks, Aaron. So before we go on to the transportation network scenarios, maybe let's pause again for a quick second. Are there any questions about the growth scenarios and the decisions that we have made there in terms of really, again, creating two bookends that we can use to test?
I have a couple questions. So first of all, I missed the packet that was sent out. I'm unable to find that in my email. If somebody could send that again. Second question is, how do your growth scenarios tie in with what's in our growth policy?
Go ahead, and then I'll jump in.
So they both would be supporting the growth policies. So we didn't want to create something that was not going to be part of our growth policies, but what the strategic growth scenario really assumes is that we would be filling existing capacity closer to the core first before expanding out further outside. So it sort of accelerates focus inward, I guess, or pushes it further towards concentrating in the core. So we didn't look at, when we were looking at available capacity to move households around, we did not change zoning or land use capacities. We were looking at where there was, within these sort of sub areas, we looked at where there was existing capacity for zoning and the land use designations, and then tried to do a better job of maximizing, or maybe not maximizing, but doing more growth in those areas in the core that had additional capacity beyond what the business's usual scenario. So less sort of piecemeal implementation of the growth policy and more systematic, like let's fill up Molinary master plan and let's do more to maximize the Brooks corridor before we're developing in these further out areas. Does that answer your question, Jeremy?
Yeah, so I assume what that means is that we're targeting the investments in transportation in those areas to help steer the growth.
We've tried to do a little, as we move into the transportation network scenarios. Yeah, Jeremy, you'll see that we've created two different scenarios, and one tries to do that a little bit more. We wanted to be careful about not over programming the transportation projects, because when we lay the transportation networks over the land use scenarios, we'll start to see some of that interaction. But you're exactly right that in thinking about this more strategic growth scenario, we wanted to be able to really test what it looks like from a transportation network perspective, what it looks like in moving toward our performance measures and targets if we do combine more focused growth and more focused transportation improvements at the same time.
And this is Vince Caristo. Based on your answer to Jeremy's question, it sounds like neither scenario would require changes in zoning. Is that true?
That is correct. At least we worked within the existing zoning. So, certainly if either of these scenarios came fully to be, there may be changes needed in the future, but we wanted to recognize the fact that the long range transportation plan is not a land use plan. Creating new zoning approaches and a new growth approach that is outside of existing city or county policy would require a really robust public process as well. And a lot of that has been done pretty recently. So no, we did not start tinkering around with zoning. All right. Any other questions on the land use piece before we move on to transportation networks? All right, so I'll keep us going, and then certainly we can come back to this as we go. So with those two growth scenarios, we have developed 3 different transportation network scenarios. And I'm going to try and talk through these in some detail because, again, the materials went out pretty late last week, and this is something that we are going to need your help and support in continuing to review over the course of this week. So this is certainly not your only opportunity to weigh in here. But what we tried to do with these 3 transportation scenarios is, again, really focus different types of projects in ways that would help to achieve our goals for Missoula Connect and for the region, but do it in slightly different ways. All 3 of the scenarios are multimodal. There is not a scenario that focuses only on active transportation projects and another one that focuses only on roadway or capacity projects. The project list as a whole, when you look at it, is really multimodal. It includes complete streets projects, active transportation, roadway projects, safety projects, and so that is built into all 3 of the scenarios as well. We again did really try to think about moving forward into the scenarios, the projects that do the most to advance our regional goals. But again, combine them in slightly different ways and think about, as Jeremy mentioned, the ways that different combinations of projects could support the future growth in different ways. For a handful of projects, you will see that they are across all 3 of the scenarios. Those include projects that we are considering to be committed. So those are the projects that are in the Transportation Improvement Program of the MPO, and also those that are in the city's new capital improvement program. We recognize that not all of those projects are fully funded, but we did some revenue projections as well and allocated dollars toward those committed projects, and felt like in a plan that's looking out 30 years, it felt really important to assume that those are sort of part of the base network as we're moving forward. I mentioned revenue forecast. So this is a high level revenue forecast at this point. It will continue to be refined as we move through not just the scenario planning process, but into the final plan. And we used a pretty conservative fiscal constraint of $178 million for each of the scenarios. Part of the reason it's a little bit conservative is because we wanted to be careful about not assuming that Missoula is going to get a whole lot of state funds without a conversation with MDT. We know that a lot of state funds have been dedicated toward Missoula projects recently. And so, and when I say state funds, I actually mean federal funds that come through the state. And so we wanted to be careful about making over assumptions really about what might be expected. So they are pretty conservative forecasts, but we felt like that was a good way to start the conversation in terms of scenarios. So the approach that we use to assign projects to the scenarios is one that really builds from the project scoring. So you may remember that our highest scoring projects are what we call our tier 4 projects and then tier 3. Part of the reason that we work in tiers for the projects as opposed to individual like numeric scores is that when we're talking about this many projects and we're talking about 30 plus criteria to score those projects, the distinctions of 1 point between a project become pretty meaningless. And so we group them into 4 tiers. We have assigned all of the top 2 scoring tier projects, so tier 4 and tier 3, all of those projects have been assigned to at least one scenario. The next thing that we did to sort of fill out our scenarios was look at projects that scored well when we added weight to the safety and equity goals. So we tripled the weight that was assigned to safety and equity and used some of those projects that rose into tier 4 and tier 3 as a way to fill out a few of the scenarios. We also went through all of the projects and identified those that had transit supportive elements, whether that is a project that would enhance a connection that's in Mountain Line's strategic plan, or really built on the multimodal nature of a corridor. We identified those for inclusion in scenarios if they weren't already. And then we also identified projects that had been established as community priorities, either because they emerged in the city's recent CIP prioritization process or through another avenue. Part of that was also looking at the Invest Health neighborhoods as places where the city and county are really focusing on making some significant investments as well. The last thing that we did in terms of assigning projects to scenarios was take a look at how the geographic spread of projects worked. One of the things that we saw in the first round of project scoring was that a lot of the projects that are in the core of the region and of the city of Missoula were scoring a bit higher than those that are in the outer areas. And so we did a little bit of deliberate raising of projects to be able to address some of that geographic diversity and really focused that on tying to ongoing planning efforts. So we tried not to just randomly grab a project that didn't connect to anything else, but to focus on projects that would help to make some of those key connections. So the 3 scenarios that we've proposed, and there is a short memo that's included in your packets that describes each of these scenarios just a little bit more, and certainly we'll pause for some discussion about these. So the 3 scenarios that we've developed for your consideration are, first off, one that we're calling new connections. And this particular scenario focuses on expanding the networks. And that doesn't mean just capacity expansion projects for vehicles, but does really look at some of the larger projects like complete street reconstruction. It looks at extensions and new trails, and then also looks at some new multimodal and pedestrian and bicycle bridges. So these new connections are about expanding the network, but also do focus multimodally. The second scenario we're calling enhanced connections. There is certainly room for argument about what is new and what is enhanced, but we did again try and draw some distinction between these 2 scenarios and really focus the enhanced connections on projects that both maintain and improve the existing network and really fill some key gaps in the existing network as well. You might think about this scenario as being a little bit more toward the inward focused growth, where we are focusing again on transportation improvements that help to create that sort of complete system. So this includes some smaller projects as well. A few of the less expensive projects really focuses on closing trail gaps and and establishing greenways as well. There are a lot of intersection improvements and safety focused projects included here too. The third scenario we've called regional equity, and this scenario again really raises projects that we hope will be critical in advancing a more equitable region. There are a couple of key elements here. So one of the things that we did was weight the equity goal by 10 to see if that would change the projects that really rose to the top. It did change a few things, but again, we also tried to look really carefully at community priorities, at Invest Health neighborhoods, and focus in on thinking about equity as, you know, both in terms of how we improve affordability at a household level, but also how we improve affordability at a system level. So a lot of the projects that are included here in the regional equity scenario focus in on equitable use of facilities and resources, and then really focus in on a few key areas. So we'll take a look at each of these in a little bit more detail. And again, you have lists and maps for each scenario included in your packets. We know this is a lot of information to go through, and so certainly don't expect that you will have reviewed all of it, but we'll just try and talk through a few of the projects that are included in each of these scenarios and then pause for some questions and discussion. So first off, we'll talk about the new connections scenario. One of the things that you'll see on the new connections map that is a little bit different than on a couple of the other maps that I'll show you is you'll see a handful of dashed lines. Those dashed red lines are projects that we initially assigned to this scenario, but when we applied the fiscal constraint of $178 million, we weren't able to afford all of those projects that we had assigned. So what you're seeing on the map here in black, you're seeing the projects that are committed. And again, those are going to be consistent across the three scenarios. And then in the red solid lines and the red, darker red dots, you're seeing the projects that we are recommended for inclusion in this particular scenario. It includes projects like Russell Street to I-90, a non-motorized bridge connection from McCormick Park. There are significant complete streets and roadway reconfiguration projects included, both for Brooks and also for Mullen Road. So one of the things that should jump out at you as you look at the number of solid lines here is that there aren't a whole lot of projects that are included in this scenario. Part of that is that when we look at these new connections and some of these bigger projects, there's simply less that we can afford within the 178 million. So that is one of the pieces to keep in mind as we flip to the next couple of scenarios. And we hope will help to illustrate one type of trade-off that is inherent in thinking about the ways we create transportation networks. So that's our new connections scenario. The second then is enhanced connections. And again, this is the scenario that focuses on maintaining and improving our current networks and focuses a little bit more on ways that we support inward growth. Because a lot of these projects are enhancements to existing facilities or in some cases upgrades of existing facilities, you'll see that there are, just by number, a lot more projects that are included in this scenario. They are a little bit lower cost by nature. You'll see a lot of focus here in the central part of the region in the city of Missoula. There are a handful of projects, again, that really focus on completing some of the investments that have already been made. And this scenario does also really focus on building out a lot of the greenway network. So a few examples of projects that are included are Ron's River Trail. Again, I mentioned a lot of the neighborhood greenways, and then you will see a lot of dots on this map, which again illustrate intersection improvements. These are often safety upgrades, but really take a wide range of different types of improvements to intersections. Then yeah, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
I just want to jump in on this because I think we
Please.
spent some time on this particular scenario because it's enhanced connections and thinking about areas of new growth. And one area that's part of that, the Mullen area that we've been spending a lot of time planning and trying to look. One of the gaps we saw in our project list was that there were no real projects trying to better connect that area to the rest of town. And so we added in some new projects that would look at, how do we get multimodal connections and other things from that Mullen area master plan into town, and what would it take to sort of enhance multimodal transportation there. Transit's already kind of included in the Mullen area master plan, but we did add some potential protected, upgrading existing bike lanes or wide shoulders to protected bike lanes to really emphasize that connecting that area into the rest of town. And so that's one of the things we were looking at, or where were some gaps in our project list between areas that we know are where we want to see high growth and the rest of town.
Thank you, Aaron. That's a really important note too. And let me just flip back and forth between these two maps just for a quick visual. So this is back to new connections and then enhanced connections. And you can see really quickly, I think, what Aaron is describing. If you focus in on where a lot of our committed projects are in the Mullen area, right? So in new connections, this is a little bit out by itself. And then as we look at the enhanced connections, you can see a handful of lines that really start to try and bring that investment into the rest of the network. So the third scenario, which we can do that flip back and forth here for a second, but again, this is the regional equity scenario. It does bear a good amount of similarity to enhanced connections in terms of some of the types of projects that are included, but again, really focuses in on projects that when we weighted equity very heavily, rose to the top, and then also focuses on invest health neighborhoods and other areas where we know we have residents of color, where we have low income populations living, and where we have pretty negative health outcomes due in large part to some of the social determinants of health. So an intentional focus again on trying to address some of those inequities that exist in the transportation system, and also thinking really carefully about the types of projects that are included. And again, thinking about how we can make more equitable use of the transportation funding that's available. And so in many cases, that means not spending everything on large dollar projects, but trying to mix and match in ways that create a more affordable transportation system. So a few examples of the projects that are included in this scenario that don't necessarily pop up in the others include the West Side Greenway Trail, the Inverness Shared Use Path, and then the North Side Bikeway. But a lot of what you'll see as you look at this scenario compared to, for example, the enhanced connections, the regional equity scenario does include more corridor or line projects than what you saw in the previous scenario. So if we just do a flip back, you'll see a lot more of the dots, which are the intersection projects and enhanced connections. And again, we made some connections focused on, really trying to reach those committed projects, focusing on the Mullen area, but not nearly as many as you saw in the previous scenario. So the last thing that I will say before I stop talking for a while and invite questions and feedback is that the very last map that you'll see in your packet is one that we're calling the illustrative projects. These are projects that are not currently included in any of the scenarios. The reason for this is there are a couple of reasons. So first and foremost, because we did set a funding constraint, not everything fits within the scenarios, but that also was pretty intentional because part of the reason that we used the scoring process first is to identify those projects that are going to do the most to advance our goals. And so some of these illustrative projects, most of these illustrative projects are slightly lower scoring or seem to be a lower priority project when compared to another one that was advanced to a scenario. Some of them, for example, might be alternatives to projects that are already included. And so it may be that, we choose one of these versus another ultimately. But there are some that I think folks may say, well, we should really elevate that into a scenario, and we can definitely talk a little bit more about that. You'll see that it is largely some of the big corridor projects that are on the illustrative list. With just a couple of exceptions, we have included all of the intersection projects in one of the 3 scenarios. Okay, so I will stop talking for a while now and invite some questions and comments and discussion. Again, we know this is a lot to absorb. I think a couple things to keep in mind as you think about your initial reactions here. So what you're seeing right now in terms of these transportation network scenarios is not the overlay with the land use scenarios, right? Because that's the piece that happens next when we go into the modeling phase of our work. We hope that you will see in these scenarios some decisions about projects that really help to refine and amplify some of the city priorities and some of the county priorities as well. But certainly the long-range transportation plan, because it focuses regionally, is a little bit different and can have some distinctions. We do believe that there's an opportunity for flexibility within these scenarios, and so we want to be clear that they're not rigid at this point, and that certainly when we think about things like intersection projects, there's an opportunity to really do some shifting as needs change over the course of this plan. So we'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions if you've got ideas about changes or anything that's missing. So let me open it up to general comments and questions first, and then Erin and I have a few specifics that we'd love to throw out as well.
All right, Ben, I see your hand is up.
Thanks. I guess, I wanted to kind of ask some process questions. So is your goal to get us to select a scenario and then that will move forward kind of whole, or is there, and then kind of related to that is if we go down the road of one scenario, our projects that are not in that scenario, will they still end up as part of the LRTP so that if the opportunity arises for a grant that makes particular sense for a project that's not in the scenario we end up choosing, we can still go after it because it's in the LRTP?
Great questions, Ben. And I apologize for not framing that up better when we started talking about process. So the short answers are no and yes. So no, you are not at this point being asked to choose one of the scenarios. We are going to analyze all 3 of these transportation network scenarios with both of the land use scenarios. So that's really 6 different combinations. Those then and the results of that analysis is what we want to take to the public as a way to help illustrate what some of the trade-offs and differences are in how we think about our land use and transportation networks together. What we anticipate is that through the public feedback and through ongoing discussion with our committees, we will likely have a couple of scenarios that do really emerge as doing the most, as really advancing us in the direction that we want to go. And then it would be a little bit more of a mixing and matching process with TTAC and with TPCC to get to that final recommended scenario that would be included in the plan. So this is not a pick one at this point, but it is also true to your second question that yes, any projects that aren't included in the recommended scenario could still be included as illustrative projects in the plan so that you can leverage opportunities as they become available.
All right, thank you so much. Jeremy, you're next.
I think my question is similar to Ben's. Are you looking for us to identify projects that might be missing or identify projects that should be in a different scenario?
I would say at this point, the most important feedback, especially over the course of this week, would be any projects that are not in any scenario right now, but should be, in part because we want to be able to model those and to understand how they would impact the outcomes that we're hoping to see. the mix, we certainly are open to shifting projects from one scenario to another. Again, part of what we tried to do is draw some distinctions between those so that we would see different outcomes from the scenarios. So what I wouldn't want to do is come out of the conversation with every project being included in every scenario, right? But certainly a little bit of switching around would be most welcome feedback.
So follow-up question, will you be evaluating performance or cost benefit on these projects?
We will be looking at a host of performance measures, and let me just flip to some of what we are anticipating. So Jeremy, some of these come out of the travel demands model and others will be done off model, but we'll be looking at a handful of metrics that really tie back to the goals. So thinking carefully about safety, about greenhouse gas reduction, about access to community places, affordability, reduction in vehicle trips. So the intent is to be pretty holistic as we think about what benefits these scenarios could deliver. We're not doing individual cost benefit analysis on the projects right now. We've established just the initial cost constraint for the scenarios. And so that becomes the cost element that we're working with right now.
May I interject for just a second as the modeler?
Hi, Dave.
Hey, so I think what we're really looking for is some real decisions on what the model runs are going to be producing and the projects that are going to be involved. Jeremy, I think that's where we need to be, because we can't run everything, but I think we've got everything considered in these scenarios, and we need to move forward from here with the model.
Great, thanks, Dave. So yeah, again, anything that is missing from one of the scenarios in particular would be helpful to know. And Sarah, I think you were on mute when you were saying something just before. Sorry.
I was saying Neil has his hand up.
Thanks, Sarah. I just, I think the enhancement, and so let me rephrase, I guess. So I'm looking at increased capacity on the trail system, and I know that we have, I did a few searches through this while we were talking, and there's path widening for Ron's River Trail and Kiwanis, but not necessarily for the Milwaukee Trail that I could find. And so I'm wondering is that under enhanced connections to increase capacity on some of those existing trail systems, like the Bitterroot and the Milwaukee?
It is included for some of them, Neil. I think we can double check and make sure that all of them that are most critical would be included. Aaron, do you want to chime in there?
Yeah, I have a sense, I'm not sure the Milwaukee and Bitterroot trail widening are in our project list right now. And that's something that we could double check and would probably want to look at whether those should be. So yeah, but yeah, so in a sense, yes, that's the scenario that they should go into, is the enhanced connections. But no, I'm not entirely sure that they're in our project list at this point. And so that's something that we should follow up on and see if they should be part of the long range plan, or if that's like a maintenance project, or where that fits into this.
Yeah, I did see Mullen Road widening and stuff. So when we're enhancing capacity or user, kind of makes sense to have it in the list if there's identified funding sources, if it's in increasing capacity instead of just replacing pavement. But I could go either way. So
we do have a Milwaukee Trail lighting project, so that might be an opportunity for when we're actually enhancing the existing trail. And then there are, I believe, 2 different projects that relate to the extension of the Milwaukee Trail in certain areas.
Yeah, I saw those, and I saw the lighting, and I saw like I said, the Ron's and the Kiwanis Park widening, and then I did see the Milwaukee extending it to the west. I didn't see the increased capacity.
Great, that's a good addition, Neil. And I think I would agree that the lighting project is one that could easily be expanded to include a little bit of widening for capacity as well. What else jumps out for folks?
This is Vince Caristo from Mountain Line. The Mullen Area Master Plan is proposing bus rapid transit route to serve the area. I think along Broadway. Is that part of the project list?
I don't know that a bus rapid transit on Broadway is. I think we have some other projects on Broadway, but that might be one that we did not get out of the Mullen Area Master Plan. But we can take a closer look at that. I think we were anticipating, or in the enhanced connections, we have a protected bike facility along West Broadway, sort of connecting out from Mary Jane down to Russell Street. But bus rapid transit might be a much bigger project there. So that's something we can take a look at.
Yeah,
No.
It could be a good discussion to have with them. I mean, it seems like they're using bus rapid transit is a really strong recommendation they're making for the success of the neighborhood. And so if it's not going to be feasible in this transportation plan, it would probably be important to have that discussion.
Great.
Right.
We have several different projects that include Broadway in some way, shape, or form. So we can take another look at that as well. There is a Broadway complete street that may need to be expanded, but that's a good one to call out, Vince. Thank you.
And we tried to identify where projects that may not necessarily be part of the Mullen Area Plan, but would somehow support it or at the expense of it. We tried to note that. So when we get that new project in there, we'll note that too, to make sure we're documenting things that are supportive of that overall effort.
Great. All right. Sarah, anything else that you're seeing from folks at this point?
No, we don't have any other hands raised unless Jeremy has another question or just haven't lowered your hand yet. I think that's what we got.
Okay, great. Well, let's talk about next steps then, because we do want to give you all a little time to digest this and continue thinking about what might need to be added. So Erin and I were chatting earlier about the best way to both give you a little bit more time to process this and how we might follow up. We would ask TTAC members to spend a little bit of time with the lists and the maps this week. And if you could provide us any feedback by the end of this week, again, any projects that are missing, projects that seem like they should be in one scenario versus another, and just really feels like an oversight that they're not categorized in one way or another. Those two pieces of feedback in particular would be really, really helpful by the end of this week. We are happy to jump on the phone with you for a one-on-one discussion as well. So please just reach out to Aaron and let him know if that would be useful. I think especially we'd encourage you to look at any major gaps that you see as you start to look at the networks. There are a handful of areas where we don't really have any projects identified for a variety of reasons. Either they didn't quite rise to the level of the long range plan, or there just haven't been any on the books. And so any thoughts about filling those would also be useful. South Hills is one that comes to mind for us. So what we'll be working on over the course of this week is continuing to think really critically about what we'll get out of the model and what else we want to measure. So we looked at these metrics quickly a minute ago, and this is going to be sort of our team's big focus while you all are reviewing the project list and the scenarios. And then again, we'll move into analysis of the scenarios, combining the transportation networks and the land use scenarios, and coming back to report on how they perform against all of these different metrics. That will be a conversation with TPCC later in October, and then also with our technical advisory committee and our citizens advisory committee for the plan. and certainly will include TTAC members in those conversations as well. And then we're getting ready for a next big round of public engagement. And this will largely be focused from about mid-November through the end of the year. We know that that is a little bit of an odd time to be focusing on heavy public engagement, but this year is a little bit odd as well. So we are really working on a wide range of different scenarios that focus both on online tools to help people compare the scenarios and the results they produce, but then also mailed surveys that are included in key service locations like the food bank, posters at mountain lion stops. So really trying to find a lot of different ways that we can reach people, recognizing that not everybody is going to engage online, but this is a critical point in the project to get people's feedback before we have a recommended project list. So it is a lot more technical analysis that's going to unfold over the next month and a half before we really heavily engage with the public. And then again, we'll be working toward other programmatic recommendations and policies while the public is providing input on the scenarios, and also working toward a draft plan in early 2021. So that's what's up next. Erin, anything else that you want to add?
I don't think so. Other than I think, we'll have an opportunity hopefully in November or December to review all of this as well. As we get some of this evaluation, we'll be bringing it back to TTAC for further input, plus our technical advisory committee for the long range plan, which many of you are involved in. So those will be other good touch points over the next month and a half to 2 months.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We know that was a lot. Appreciate you bearing with us.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation. It's always just kind of amazing to see how much work you've done from between these updates. Per our procedures for this, we will go ahead and open up this item to public comment in case anybody at home or on the line or joining us in the Zoom meeting wants to comment on the update to the long range transportation plan. I'm going to go ahead and open the phone lines, and our meeting admin will put the call numbers on the screen now. I will once again read some of them in case we have anybody with vision difficulties. 1-267-831-0333 and 1-888-475-4499. The meeting ID is 960-049-3694. We'll answer calls in the order received. I'll call on you by your phone number, and please be sure to mute your TV or computer and tell us your name and what your comment is. Go ahead and give that a few minutes. All right, doesn't look like we have anybody calling in or raising their hand in our meeting for more information. So we'll go ahead and move on. It doesn't look like we have any old business. Do we have any announcements or closing comments?
I don't think so. Not from MPO staff.
All right, well, an uneventful September for everyone, apparently. That's great. So let's go ahead and move ahead on to our adjournment. Thank you all for coming to this meeting, and we look forward to learning more about what's up with the LRTP next. Don't forget to really review those projects. There's a lot, and get your comments in so they can be incorporated into the next step. Thank you so much, and I'm going to say this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. See you.